Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first session, Session A, Gothic Bodies. Um, we have contributors Hannah Singleton and Karen Smith. I think everyone who's in the room has been in the room before, so I'm not going to tell you where the restrooms are. Hopefully, you can figure those out. But if you're online and you need anything, our moderator is still Jess. She is in the chat, so feel free to chat with her. Um, and as with everything in this symposium, we encourage creativity. If you'd like to do creative note taking while we're doing this, or make art or anything, feel free to use those slides that we had for the roundtable. Jess is going to put the link in the chat, but don't feel pressure if you do not want to. And yes, now it is my pleasure to introduce again. This is the session on Gothic bodies. These are two of our contributors to the special issue, Hannah Singleton and Karen Smith. And we are going to start with Hannah. So I'll let you take it away, Hannah.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, I'm just going to try and bring up my presentation. I'm not used to using Zoom because we tend to use Teams in the UK. So, okay. Um, okay, I go to that. Um, if I then perhaps if I do it as a slideshow, um, is that looking about right? Can I have a thumbs?
Looks
Okay.
great.
Okay, perfect. Technological demons over with. So, hi. Um, My name's Hannah. I'm at the School of Art and Design at Manchester Metropolitan University. So that's in the north of England. Um, and I just wanted to share my Instagram. And I've also just added to the chat there my research group, Dark Manchester, where we've got a call out at the moment for an in-person symposium in September, looking at a culture as methodology. So if anyone's around in the UK and fancies joining, but do follow them on Insta as well. There's loads of really interesting practice-based stuff that feels a little bit aligned with some of what we've been looking at today already. So, okay, I'm going to start. So, yeah, I work in an art school. My work is actually I teach contextual studies to kind of fine art and sort of curating and art history students. So my work personally tends to explore archives and sites, recontextualizing and translating the records of past events and ephemeral moments. So I use things like text, performance, and academic writing. Um, so this paper in particular um, sort of looks at some of the work I've carried out in the last year, really, in response to time spent exploring the archives of female mediums within the holdings of the Society for Psychical Research at Cambridge University Archives. And in particular, I've focused on one medium, Theodora Bazanke, for the purposes of this upcoming Gothic Studies article and the presentation I'm doing today. And thinking about this theme overall of corresponding with the archive. So, a little bit about the archive. Um, Sorry, one second. So just anything with this tag of SPR archival research, if I could ask you not to take or share any images of that because that's direct from the archive. So I've already kind of discussed that. But yeah, so I did want to share some of the images from the archive though, because they're so rich and I couldn't really use these kind of collage style research images in the article itself, because obviously if you're using any images from the archive, it has to be their kind of photographs and the way they want to present it. So I did want to share a little bit of that kind of archival practice I was doing visually as well today. So the majority of the records held in the archives of the Society for Psychical Research, or SPR, so they have a vast archive of all kind of occultic, esoteric kind of research that was carried out in Britain from the Victorian era, and it's still going as a society. But what I looked at when I went to the archives was mediums, and specifically female mediums, and most of that was from the early 20th century up until the mid 20th century. So most of the archives there in relation to those female mediums are accounts of the investigations by skeptical group members. So they tended to attend these seances and try and uncover kind of charlatans, basically. So there was kind of a lot of there was a lot of observation, a lot of kind of criticality they were kind of basically trying to catch out fraudulent performers and scam artists. So the archives of the SPR's medium investigations have been previously used by a few researchers, not many, but most notably by Malcolm Gaskill in his work on Helen Duncan, who was famed as the last woman to be convicted of witchcraft in the UK in 1945. Unbelievably, that the image on the left there is some of Helen Duncan's kind of archive. Um, and then also it's kind of been used by the writer Marina Warner in discussing some of the embodied qualities of mediumship, performances, and ectoplasm as well. On the right-hand side of the frame here, the inset picture is from a seance, a medium from the flower medium Hilda Lewis, who again a really rich visual archive. She was an absolute fraud, an absolute charlatan, but a really intriguing story. But then at the back, we've got that automatic writing. So that is Theodora Bazanke, and that's going to be the kind of focus of the study. I did start by writing my Gothic Studies article about all three of these, and then the very patient advice from the editors was that actually there's too much going on here. The advice I give my undergraduate students all the time when they're doing their essays, sort of you need to pare this down and sort of kill your darlings a little bit. But I think this might become, I don't know, it might become a book, an exhibition, series of podcasts. It's such a rich archive, but we're going to talk about Theodora Bazanke today. So Bazanke had a long-standing interest in the esoteric, particularly the research and the approach adopted by the SPR. So she was actually a member of the SPR, unlike the other mediums I've been looking at. She was an active member. She was interested in the occult, the esoteric, and kind of various kind of forms of research in relation to that. So the archive I was exploring of hers is not one based on an investigation or a suspicion, but rather her own exploration of mediumship through automatic writing, drawing, and mark making. She was perhaps best known as the former assistant to the novelist Henry James. So in the final 9 years of his life, she worked closely with him. He dictated his writing to her, which she transcribed using a typewriter. So this act of listening and recording the speech of another, which kind of became really important thinking about her mediumship and then the way I also interpret it. So Bazanko, though, she's kind of a more intriguing figure than just that alone. She was actually, as well as being a female literary assistant, she was a writer in her own right. She was publishing under her name. She was university educated. And from 1935, she was editor of the political arts journal Time and Tide, which was founded by her romantic partner of many years, Lady Margaret Ronda. So she was a kind of lesbian existing in the 1930s and 40s, not that secretly. They lived together and did do until the both of their deaths. So really just a really interesting person that I just found by chance in the archive, really. So the archival records I've been looking at were dated mainly from 1933 to the 1940s, so long after the death of Henry James. But much of the records that I was exploring track her attempts to connect with Henry James from beyond the grave through her automatic writing. So a kind of an amazing premise to kind of start exploring. Moving on to think a little bit about the kind of the basis for the article and thinking about the idea of Gothic practice, that prompt we had from the editors. So looking at these documents in the archive that pertain to seances and mediumship, definitely felt like a Gothic pursuit. But beyond that that initial kind of ghostliness and haunting, there was something in the application of my own practice which involved this repetition, the inhabiting of gestures, and then also the notion of corresponding with these traces of long dead mediums in the form of a conversation with the work that I kind of wanted to dig into a little bit more again and interrogate that idea of Gothic practice. So I've written in my notes, as I know where others will have mentioned, Tim Jones's 2009 article. I knew that it was already going to have come up, even though I'm the first sort of presenter after the roundtable. That was so important for me. So that idea of that Gothic habitus that I was definitely inhabiting, but kind of also thinking about that innate sense of it. So to quote the article, the Gothic habitus or the Gothic subject matter is doubling the uncanny, the spectral, and otherness, which definitely kind of is being hit on already by all the kind of things I was looking at. But I also kind of thought about how, with Jones's work, how we can kind of go beyond those qualities of the genre, but it's the process of doing and engaging with the archives, the histories, and the mediums that allowed some more of these aspects to be drawn out as a Gothic practice. So kind of going beyond just that surface genre, thinking about how we do Gothic was really important. And that dialogue with the past is being one that I'm framing here as that kind of correspondence with the archive as being the Gothic practice at the heart of what I'm doing. So yeah, I just wanted to briefly mention that although this is the work I've been doing for the past year, actually my kind of my practice has kind of been circling some of these things for a long time. So this image is from my PhD final presentation, which was a long time ago now. This was in 2015, so over a decade ago. But I was kind of working with archives of performance and kind of these other temporal practices, thinking about the absent performer, the absent kind of artist, and how you kind of can document and kind of archive that practice. So thinking about encoding and translating ephemera and objects and records. So this image is from my final piece that was an intervention made in the strong room at the Special Collections Archive at Manchester. Um, Sort of thinking about displaying an archival record of 3 years worth of practice. But in the very top drawer, there are some little pinned objects, which I'm going to just show you a close-up of now, because actually automatic writing was even in my practice, like kind of back then as well, although it wasn't a really prominent aspect. I was really interested in the ways of kind of that you can use the mark making of the moment, and then the kind of later translation, and kind of play with authorship, and also how far an audience or viewer or reader might believe what you're saying or not. So there was all these always these threads that kind of existed through my practice. And thinking about the reality of history versus artifice as well. Um, yeah, and that's just some of the sort of automatic writing I was doing at the time, alongside an archival catalogue I wrote that accompanied that exhibition. Because again, this idea of the form and the language of the institution of the archive is something that I kind of think is quite an interesting thing to intervene with and play with as well. Things that can look quite formulaic and boring, kind of have that potential for poetics as well. Okay. Oh. So going back to this idea then of Gothic practice, and then I've kind of sort of stated, kind of Gothic practice in the archive specifically in the case of my work. So um yeah, so sort of coming from my PhD, I was really interested in working, and it became a core element of what I was doing was Ricoeur's work on writing history and the taxonomy of the archival in particular. So this was central in relation to thinking about trace. So for Ricoeur, the trace exists as a mark of a past time, but one which requires translation and interpretation, making it more difficult to immediately comprehend than historical elements like a document, for example. So Ricoeur states, quote, "The phenomena of the trace thus finds itself displaced from the historical towards the intratemporal, that which is within time," end quote. So with this form of the trace, we move away from the time of the individual, and it allows for dialogue and a pathway between times to open up through the materials deposited within the archive if the researcher chooses to imaginatively engage with them. That's my kind of bit of my research. That was my PhD, kind of thinking about this idea of the trace. So, and intratemporality has been this really kind of evocative term, I think, for kind of working with an archive, and almost that allowing you to correspond through time, correspond through eras and lives, and then kind of beyond the grave, to put it Gothically, I suppose, as well. Um, so alongside a resonance with the otherworldly communication attempted by mediums featured in the archives of the SPR, this also connects to Jones's interpretation of the Gothic text as, quote, "a concrete means by which the past of the Gothic as a practice remains present and perpetuates itself into the future," end quote. So again, that sense of moving between temporalities and that being a possibility is something that I kind of approach the archive with in mind as a practitioner as well. And thinking about the ways that trace offer a way in to the interpretation and understanding of these records and histories. So kind of combined with that idea of intratemporality and archival theory, the uncanny and the uncanny body were also really important to the project as a whole. thinking about the doubling of the medium's body in the moment of the seance, so their body taking on another, and sort of thinking about that conjured other spirit. But then also my doubling and recreating of the records and the traces I've found, which I'm going to show you a little bit later on. And there's also this movement from the institutional to the domestic, sort of with, and from the institutional to the artistic, I suppose that's interesting as well. So, but I wanted to say I'm very much using the uncanny as part of a Gothic feminist practice rather than a Freudian one. So thinking about the institution again and that idea of the feminine domestic space. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Gonna move on from this. So just to show you some of Theodora Brzanke's archives. So these are some of the sort of initial images that kind of really drew me in. So these kind of sort of part of why I decided to focus on her archive in particular was the presence of these records that acted as traces of her own practice as someone who was kind of she was trying to learn automatic writing. So you kind of see her kind of going through this process of first working with another medium, Hester Dowden, having a spirit guide that was very problematic for her, and then kind of doing her own practice. So that was kind of interesting, tracing that her own path of a practice as well in terms of someone who was working as in mediumship and automatic writing. But then also this got the sort of ephemera of everyday life and the kind of sweet notes and illustrations of kittens and things like that that kind of show me a little bit of her as a person as well. That is something I'm always wanting to find in an archive. So, Bozanke, because she bequeathed this archive directly to the SPR herself. So it was her choice what went in. She had that control and she had that power. Again, coming with a sort of feminist ethical framework that felt quite important to me. I was kind of I wasn't looking that there's some of the other archives I looked at, there was more of a problematic in terms of the ethics, which is something I want to explore, but that wasn't as present here. Um, so although her body is absent from the documentation, that we don't have the sort of photographs or kind of film or whatever that some of the other mediums do of them actually performing any of these seances, it felt that she was very present, or even more present as a person in the archive because it was her authorship and it was her choice to be here in a way. So yeah, it felt there was lots of this idea of trace there. There was lots of her marks, lots of her presence within these records. Um, okay, I'll move us on to the next slide. Sorry. Okay, so yeah, again, these are some of the original records I was exploring. So oh, sorry, I'm just trying to look at the time as well. I probably need to speed up a little bit. So these kind of miscellaneous files and notebooks. So as well as having some of her, she transcribed some of her automatic writing, but I was kind of more drawn to these miscellaneous stuff that weren't transcribed, that were a little bit less knowable, but offered up this opportunity to decode the contents, to reinterpret the contents. So these enigmatic diagrams, looping handwriting, personal objects, and postcards all drew me in, but resisted immediate comprehension. But it's these I started to work through by repeating the marks and symbols. So in my own kind of drawing, writing practice, kind of repeating those, sort of thinking about moving on to a slower interpretation though. So immediately I just kind of started kind of following these lines and trying to do automatic writing almost, but it felt like I needed to spend a little bit longer with them. So I started to use things like sewing, and different forms of mark making to just kind of extend that time period a little bit. So working with these records, it feels as though there is a constant doubling taking place. As I said, Bazanke with Henry James, or whatever, or her spirit guide, Johanna's, or other people, and then Bazanke again through the records and my attempts to revive them, and her in my gestures in the present. Um, okay, I'm going to sort of speed up a little bit. Okay, yeah, I am. So I have so much to say about this. It's so rich. Right. So these are some of my initial experimentations. So yeah, the really quick, just making marks in a kind of sketchbook that I've kind of recorded here. But as I said, I kind of felt, although there was something happening, I kind of wanted to slow that process down. Um, so although what did happen with these was that I was able to get that sense of reenacting or recreating, this idea of the gesture as being kind of important. It became kind of halting though. It was too literal a repetition at first. So I was drawn, however, to these repeated spirals that kind of happen throughout. Um, sort of thinking about them as kind of they're less yeah, away from the linguistic, but that spoke to some of the kind of esoteric female surrealist artists I love, like Hilma af Klint and Ethel Colquhoun and people like that. So yeah, as I said, I went on to work with sewing, thinking about how that slowed down things. I would use cream on cream because it wasn't about creating an image, creating an artwork. It was about sort of the time spent with it. So something that almost felt like it was invisible, felt like the most important, sort of appropriate way to kind of begin to do that. And then my cat came to investigate when I was making some of these at home. So that's in the top left image there. I thought that was a good tribute to Theodora and her love of cats and kittens as well. But yeah, this idea of being in dialogue with the archive, slowing down the process, slowing down the gestures, and sort of really spending time trying to inhabit in some ways her story and the records that I found. Oh, I don't know. So something that I have begun working on then is recording some little clips. These are just some tests for something that might become a bigger performance, but thinking about how I can record myself, whether this might become a way of tracing some of these spirals, some of the crosses, some of the symbols that are used, maybe for a durational video performance, or I don't know if it's something I want to do on a daily basis to kind of make more of a practice. So I'm still kind of thinking through what might become some kind of more resolved works. But for me, the important bit that I'm kind of narrate in the Gothic Studies article is actually just being with the archival materials. It's that stage before a more resolved work happens that for me can sometimes be the most rich area in terms of making a discovery or kind of figuring out what it is that I want to say or how I feel about these archives. Okay, I was going to talk about Susan Hiller's work, but I don't think I have too much time left. So instead, I'm just going to say Susan Hiller did automatic writing. She's a very big influence on my practice and an amazing artist. So go and have a look at her stuff. Um, yeah. So, and instead, I'm going to go on to just kind of close up with just a couple more comments. So, um, yeah, so these are some of the files that I started making. So although these kind of take on the aesthetics of the archive, so using the kind of the cardboard file, using a certain kind of paper, I kind of wanted to not do a facsimile that kind of had tea stains or anything like that on, but just kind of work with a sort of materials that felt appropriate. Um, I started by, in those early stages, kind of literally tracing lines and literally doing something. Here, what I've done is I've kind of started to kind of take on some of her symbolism. So some of Theodora Bazanco's symbolism, some of the words, but I've kind of played with redaction. I've kind of moved things around. So sort of like that middle sheet there. There was a lot more text in the original. I've kind of done a redaction by what I've copied and what's present and what's not present. So again, these feel like they're kind of a regular practice that I kind of need to keep repeating. I'm building up this set of files, which I might bring with me to the IGA at Hull, actually. This kind of all these documents. I kind of like this idea that it's a record again that tracks my engagement with Bazanco's archive, with her materials, and sort of it's now starting to feel a little bit tricky to decipher where I start and she begins as an author, which was again part of my intention. So I'm trying to be really good and keep on time here and not go into Karen's time. So I'm going to sort of finish by this concluding slide. So this is Theodora on the right. I think that was probably when I think she was about my age there. I think she's about 40 in that image. So that's why I wanted to use that one as well. But I think my work that I do, I try and make it very ethical in the way that I use histories, and I want to sort of center the people that are in those histories as well. So I kind of wanted to just end with that image of her. And then on the left is some more of my kind of work with those kind of creating those archives and documents. So I'm just going to read a couple of lines here, and that will be my conclusion. So through the process of working with these archives and my practice-based response, I've sought to make Bazanco as present as possible, drawing on the work of Avery Gordon and recognizing that these ghosts found within the archive have their own agency and that, in a very Jamesian turn, the ghost is haunted too. I've framed the work as a correspondence with the archive and with Bazanco, a Gothic form which allows for a slippage across time, doubling, repetition, and uncertainty. Although my practice has made use of haunting, doubling, and reanimating, it is not a seance. However, the archive can be positioned as the site of return and haunting, a place to carry out these conversations and transgress boundaries as part of the Gothic method of inquiry and practice. Okay, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. We're going to move into Karen and then we'll do a Q&A after that.
Hello, can you hear me? Finally, sorry for all this kerfuffle. I'm not used to this system. I stopped teaching before all of this online malarkey started. So I've done a few presentations like this. Now I've just got to get my overheads up. Try sharing again, I'm being told by my tech support here. Window. That one. Yep, share.
Yay, we can see it.
Right, so finally.
Click onto it.
No, I need to open it up.
Yeah, that's when you click onto it.
See, I'm also not used to Macs.
Click on the thing itself.
Right.
Okay, so it's not letting you do full screen for some reason.
Yes, it will allow me to do full screen now. And then I will do view, and I will do slideshow, and I will do play from start. Okay.
Can you see beautiful, yes, and that was a beautiful illustration of good pedagogy in terms of talking us through the things that you're doing because we can't see your hands moving. So thanks for that.
Sorry for my disastrous start. So I just want to check the time. Right, okay. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm doing something on becoming a goth, or I have done something on becoming a goth. I want to say thanks to the organisers. It was a brilliant idea, and there's you've got some great sessions planned, and it was a really interesting session to kick off with. It's late afternoon over here at the moment. Just to say, I'm feeling very vulnerable at the moment because what I've done is write something that was very, very personal, and perhaps from an academic point of view, a little bit oversharey. And I still wanted to get it out there. I think this is what's been so wonderful about this, that there's been so much floating around in certain areas about how goth started. And I bow to Hannah because obviously there was a goth scene going on in the north. I think even before it started in London. I think Leeds was a centre for it. With all that palaver, I'm going to be talking about becoming a goth and the Batcave, the joy of dancing and the uncanny. And there's a Batcave membership card. It's not my Batcave membership card because I lost, I was mugged, and I had a whole bunch of cards stolen. And it goes to show that I was carrying my Batcave card around with me 10 to 15 years after the Batcave had closed. And that obviously requires some thinking about. So please bear with me on this because as a scholar, I have used academia to kind of give me some distance from things. And this is quite close to me. Although some of this material did end up in my PhD some years ago. I'm one of the later stages scholars. I'm independent nowadays. I have taught across London universities and in Sussex, but I was based mainly at London Met University and Birkbeck. So just to explain the initial thing, sorry, I'm taking an awful long time about this. Batcave membership card, not mine. Mine was stolen. It was so traumatic when that went. It just felt like part of my life had gone. The other image, which we will be coming back to, is the divine Fenella Fielding in the world's greatest red velvet dress. So some basics. I used autoethnography, so I was examining my own experiences, although many of them were fairly vague. Again, I'm making myself very vulnerable here because of substances that had been consumed while I was out clubbing. this autoethnographic approach was new. I've looked at ethnographies, I've studied anthropology, I've taught oral history, but I'd never tried autoethnography. And it's partly I got in touch with this wonderful group of people because I was absolutely sick and tired of the accepted history of Goth online. And I have used in my work, in my research, habitus, taste, subcultural capital quite extensively. And the idea that there is a Gothic habitus just made so much sense to me. And although subcultural capital, I think, is quite a useful idea, I've kind of moved on to the idea of scene. It's much better when you hear kind of popular coverage of subcultures, they often refer to movements as if there's some kind of manifesto. And sometimes there is a manifesto, but with punk, there wasn't really a written manifesto, and certainly there wasn't one with goth. So I like the idea of scene, which is a kind of network of people interacting with each other, and how those people can turn a non-place, in Auger's terms, into a place. So Auger talks about postmodernity and non-places like supermarkets and airports and so forth. And the places that people live in and have connections with and community with are places. And I was working in King's Cross, which is very much a non-place, a very transitory place. And going to lots of clubs. And this is in the late 70s, early 1980s, which is thousands of years ago to many people. And I found that marvelous transformation of a place which is empty and echoing when it fills full of people to be one of the most kind of exciting things that can happen. I was working in clubs, I was working in cinemas, and I kind of settled down working at a place called the Scala Cinema in the early 80s. And so I could actually watch the Scala be this empty, very Gothic building shell transform into something living and breathing with the people inside it. Very, very fascinated with Gothic and folk horror in the UK. It's kind of Western woven into my life, as it were, in terms of the things that I liked and in terms of the things that I participated in. And also, I mentioned Irving Goffman and I mentioned Vic Turner about rituals and initiations and rites of passage. The rather hysterical photograph there is me in the middle, two girlfriends from the Scala, we all work together, and it's at a club called Heaven in Camden. So this is me pre-goth. So I'm wearing white, and I've got a big crucifix on. It's a very pretty crucifix. So this is the Scala, a flea pit and a bud hole, and that's the Scala program. So this was the place that I was working while I was doing my degree. And these were the things that fed into my habitus. These were the things that filled my imagination. Hammer horror films, Hammer Gothic horror films, especially things like the vampire films. And because of that, my friend Lorna said to me, I know a place that you should go to. And she told, I'd known about the Batcave, it had been publicized, but I didn't want to go because the USP for it was no funk, no disco. And I loved funk and I loved disco. And it also kind of worried me that this might be some kind of weird white nationalist thing in the early 80s. I couldn't see how, because I couldn't see how anyone could do that in the center of Soho. But the music policy kind of, did my head in at the time. Clearly not a particularly academic take on that. It didn't fit with the clubs that I was going to. So I didn't go in the first week. I went in the second week. So I was in the second week of the Batcave, which I will come on to explain a little bit more. But this is my imagination filled with vampires. This is also further a part of my imagination here with the Mark of the Red Death. I'd seen Hammer films on television. I'd seen Hammer films in cinemas. They were all made 10 to 15 years before I was going to the cinema. So these were old reruns. And the Roger Corman films I'd seen on television, and I was absolutely fascinated by them. But I'd actually read Edgar Allan Poe before then. And I'd gone to, my mother had badgered me into going to a school, not a school, a church disco. And I needed some way to fend off people to keep them away from me. So I took a very large copy of the complete works of Edgar Allan Poe and sat in a corner and read it. And it works beautifully. So I'm kind of revisiting something which is very misty for me. And again, I read Daphne du Maurier and absolutely loved her. And I don't care whether Hitchcock didn't like this film or not. So this was the Scala at King's Cross. And it was a tatty old cinema. And it was very run down, and people enjoyed it for its grottiness, but also its strangeness. There was a strangeness about the building because it had been inhabited by so many different other organizations and people. I mean, before the Scala Cinema moved in, it was a primatarium, and people thought that they kept monkeys there. And you would often get people would say, I can smell the monkeys. Well, in fact, there'd never been any monkeys in, but there had been decoration to make it look like a jungle space. So that's the July 1981 program. And at the bottom is a picture of Bride of Frankenstein, which was what we showed on the day that Princess Di got married. The royal wedding. So we were trying to say that we were very different kinds of people. So this is, and you're probably wondering how this is Gothic practice. Well, it's Gothic practice in terms of the habitus that I was part of, that I am part of, but also obviously it is part of the creation of Goth. And my practice here is trying to tell that story and trying to tell other stories. So this is a leaflet I made to promote Scala All-Nighters. So that's, sorry, in my head, that was me in the image. And what I did was, because I was an inveterate club goer, I took this around to clubs and dropped it off. So that's my homemade leaflet to try and publicize the Scala. You might think, why would you do that when you've got the lovely poster there? But I thought we needed a bit of a push to get people to come in on late all-nighters. So we ran all-nighters on Saturdays. So these are just a few. I've still got them. I've stuffed them in my kids' bedroom. So these are some of the things that began bubbling under in terms of my interests and my imagination as a child. I was obsessed with Peter Pan, absolutely obsessed with Peter Pan. Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland. I don't have a copy of Alice in Wonderland there at the moment. Myths, legends, stories, C.S. Lewis I loved, E. Nesbit, all of these kind of, there was Edwardian children's stories, but also children's stories from much more recent period, like Alan Garner's, where you've got wild woods and magic in the woods. And also there's a Ladybird book of ballet there, because I was very interested in finding out about ballet. And that leads me on to Powell and Pressburger. But I just wanted to note that I love ballet, I love Tchaikovsky, and I knew Swan Lake like the back of my hand. But when television was screening the 1931 Universal Dracula, directed by Todd Browning, it opens with the pas de deux from Swan Lake. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified, because it was music that I loved, that I thought was all beautiful and romantic. And when I heard it in conjunction with the idea of Dracula, I suddenly saw it as something menacing and sad, and made me rethink my understanding of that music. And it was devastating for me. I was terrified and devastated. So these are the images, again, that really kind of struck me as a child. And as a teenager, I became obsessed with. These are images from Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger's The Red Shoes. The top two are the red shoes, Moira Shearer, and below Black Narcissus. And they are absolutely stunning still images. And they're very, very created, very performative. Some of them are from performances. So there's Moira Shearer as a ballet dancer, and some of them as a woman is transforming from a nun into herself. She's becoming herself by putting on her lipstick. So these are, I was fascinated by them. And these imageries seem to mediate between the Irish Gothic of my childhood. I had quite an Irish childhood, going back to, my parents are immigrants, and I would often go back to Ireland, and then the present, well, not the present day, but this fantastical world that Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger had constructed, and my mother's look fascinated me. It was a 50s, early 60s look, with big billowing skirts, black hair, black beehive hair, cat's flip eyeliner, cinched waist, and just fabulous clothes. And so I was one of those little girls who used to dress up in her mummy's clothes. This is a reference to the haunted generation, the idea that there's a generation of consumers, of people who grew up watching scary television, but I'm the generation earlier than that. So I find that quite an interesting thing, that we prefigured this idea of the haunted generation with their weird and uncanny fascinations, Witchfinder General, Blood on Satan's Claw, The Wicker Man. So here we're back to Divine Fenella Fielding. It was from a film called Carry On Screaming, which was a parody of all of the Hammer horror films. But this is such an amazing dress that I became obsessed with it. And the other things that I was watching were also things like M.R. James stories, Adam Adamant, and there is Mrs. Peel in The Avengers down the bottom, which we showed at the Scala. These are some images which may or may not be from the Batcave. So the ones that are labelled the Batcave clearly come from there. There's two pictures of the club, Gossip's Club, where the Batcave was held. And there's two photographs of mine that I cannot swear to, but I think are from the Batcave. So it was a no-funk policy, and what I wore there the first time was, generally just, fairly ordinary clubbing. But as time went on, I started trying to develop my look, and I had, it was very difficult to get black clothes in those days, because it wasn't regarded as fashionable. And so you make do and mend. And so I was making clothes. So this was my transformation. So the one on my left-hand side is me in 1981, wearing all the clothes are secondhand, the jewelry secondhand. The one on the extreme right, the large one, again, secondhand clothes, secondhand jewelry. And anyone with long hair knows what I've done to my hair. I've got it all plaited up at the back so that when I get to the club, I can back comb it. The top left-hand photograph is the closest to the Batcave period. The one in the middle slightly after, and the one at the end was slightly after that. So black clothing was difficult to get hold of. I had to get secondhand clothes and dye the clothes, mixing lipsticks to make black, crimping my hair, whitening my pale face, long skirts, petticoats, sweetheart necklaces, excess diamante, jet black, black jet, and ropes of pearls, leather, and studs and fishnet. I wanted to both terrify and also be strange. I wanted to be strange in the street. I wanted to terrify people who might come up to me and annoy me. I wanted to take over the space, to inhabit, and that's part of going to late night clubs and coming out in the early hours of the morning. So a new scene arose from the Batcave, which was a very, very grotty venue. It was very cramped. You got up to it in a lift. And in the first few weeks, no one knew what music to play. And the music fell back on Bowie and fell back on Mark Bolan and Susie and the Banshees and so forth. But then it gradually developed outwards. And so I became, in my head, I was the devil in the black dress, dancing to the Sisters of Mercy, also psychobilly as well. So the scene arose, I must be at the end. I can't really see how long I've got left. So I'll just show you.
3 minutes.
Sorry?
About 3 minutes.
Oh, 3 minutes. Oh, great. More time than I thought. So a new scene arose from the Batcave in Soho, which was full of ghosts. I haven't really developed that here, but Soho is a space where so many clubs of different sorts have existed. People from the aristocracy, people, criminals, people who work in the theatre, people who work in hospitality, everyone would congregate in Soho. They wouldn't do so now. And it had so many stories, so many layers. Whenever I would go into Soho, I'd be overtaken by this sense of so many other people and so many immigrants. It was a place of immigrants. So there's so much different food and so much different wine and just, you know, sheer joy. So a new scene arose from the old at the Batcave, from the shadows of post-punk confusion, emerging house scenes. Substances and bodily fluids were exchanged, and if lucky, some great music and dancing was experienced, creating a physical, even transcendent experience. My experience and memory of the Batcave was explicitly subversive and carnivalesque, potentially outside normal space and time, transitory rituals of inversion, sacred and profane. So autoethnography seeks to disinter the lives of those left unrecorded. And there's lots more detail in the article. And the image in the middle, there's another leaflet that I made with Bolan, but you can see the kinds of things that went on at the Scala. I'm just going to show you this very, very quickly. That is an image from my niece. I'm going to take it back because I'm not quite sure who owns the rights to the dollies. It's a funeral, which she said she was doing in order to use up the material, but I think something has filtered through. So I've tried to escape anachronistic labels, positioning myself within a particular habitus, only later branded as goth. My Gothic practice continued long after the Batcave. Sitting on the tube reading an anthropology textbook years after the Batcave closed, I noticed an agitated woman and resorted to the London Underground avoidance practice, ignore. She broke all tube protocols, slipped into the seat beside me, spoke. "Are you a witch?" she asked. I had yet to invent the ghost, but that's another story from below. The end.
Thank you very much.
Have I left enough time for questions?
Yes, I wanted to leave time for us to have some questions. So I think, you know, if we've got any in the room or any online, please feel free to ask them. And I haven't been looking at the chat. Are there any questions in the chat?
Not yet.
Yeah, go for it.
I know that Karen's presentation, she talked about how she wanted to terrify or like cause terror in her book.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering about like the affect of the Gothic and like what it does to the viewer, but also what does it do to the person who's being viewed. So like,
Ah,
how did she feel as the person being viewed with that aesthetic? I guess I should.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually go into more detail in it in the article. I kind of zoomed past things, but it was a massive freedom. I just felt so strong, so powerful. Um, it was kind of the anti-Lady Di thing. It was against what we were calling yuppies at the time. I think you call them preppies, but I mean it was just so antithetical to that. I was a blot on the landscape. I was a ghost. I was a vampire. I felt so fabulous. It was what both dancing on the dance floor, and I danced till my feet bled. Um, and because I wore very, very silly shoes, very, heels that big. And I also wore laced up shoes as well. But in myself, for myself, that was part of the development of the look, the things that I thought made me feel good. And that white thing, the thing that I was wearing at the start when I was going to heaven, that was in order to dance in a really sweaty space. So it's a man's vest and a big skirt. And as I was developing my look, it became darker, it became velvet, it became silky, and I loved it, and corsets and things like that. But it terrified people on the bus. I mean, it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. It was like I had a cordon sanitaire around myself, which is actually what you want in a very busy, very crowded city. But that was at night, and that was when I was going out at night. So and as anyone knows, going out at night, if you're smallish, you can be prey, and I didn't want to be prey. I wanted to be the hunter, so yes, I mean it's a really good question, and I do actually say something about it in the article. But yeah, and the effect it had on other people was terrifying. They were terrified. It was brilliant, absolutely, and it was just funny for that. It was worthwhile doing just to wind people up. But then it just became, just building on it and building on it and building on it. It was just so much fun. And also, I'm just taking myself out of the kind of capitalist nexus, because I was making things, and because I was, I was still buying things secondhand, but I was doing things to them. What is it? Détournement. I was putting them in different contexts. The classic subcultural thing. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, absolutely.
I actually have a question for Hannah, which is one thing that struck me is in kind of translating automatic writing to needlepoint or sewing, like it seems to change the tactility and time of and I'm wondering if you could share your thoughts on that, because I'm thinking of like sewing is so tactile, but I mean pencil on paper is too, but it's a very different experience.
Yeah, thanks. That was, yeah, very much, I guess, part of the thinking behind it, and sort of a lot of my research was around that idea of what can be in the archive. You can have the documents, you can have the stuff, the physical remains, but what exists beyond the archive, sort of in sort of performance scholarship is the gesture. So this idea of the kind of the embodied gesture. So I guess kind of testing those different mediums, testing something that's very quick, but then testing. So and I'm not a textile artist by any means. So again, it was kind of part of the reason for doing things in sewing and fabric was taking away that kind of skill almost. It wasn't me trying to make an artwork, it was me trying to do a thing and spend time doing a thing. And yeah, the physicality was interesting. Like when you're not a textile artist, if you're trying to sew, you kind of prick your finger and it kind of rubs, and it's kind of hard work, and then your cat comes and jumps on it and gets in a tangle. So all those kind of things that kind of also, I think there was something around, I guess there's something around the domestic and the feminine as well that kind of maybe came in there that I didn't really explore too much. I'm a bit hesitant on that point, but yeah, it was all about slowing down, and sort of that idea is just spending time with the history. So that's something that I kind of repeatedly do in my work in different ways. Is just kind of, yeah, how can I sort of almost sort of spend the time meditating, or kind of doing something that it just takes so long to do. Yeah.
Can I just say it was a really, really interesting paper? Thank you.
I loved yours as well. I felt like I was learning my cultural history as also
From the elders.
Yeah, I was doing that in the early 2000s amongst a sea of new metal. So yeah.
It's a different trajectory by that
Yeah.
stage. Which is why I hoped that the idea of kind of becoming goth would fit in with Gothic practice. And definitely the Gothic habitus is I'm there.
Mm.
Are there any other questions or anything in the chat? This has been wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed. I've already read your articles, but it was so nice to hear you talk about them, and it makes me excited. And now I want to go home and mix all my lipsticks together and see if I can get one.
You got to have the lip liner.
Yeah, oh, that is good. That is yeah, that is smart. So we are, let's see, we are on break so that those of us here in Detroit land can get something to eat. And we will be back, let's see, at 1:30 our time. So I don't know what that is your time, or if you will even be with us. But it may be, yeah, it may be late for some of you across the pond. But for those of you in the general vicinity of the US, 1:30 Eastern time for creative hauntings with some Detroit, Wayne State students and alumni. But yes, thank you once again to both Karen and Hannah. And Karen, you wanted to say something?
Can I just say, I think this has been a fabulous experience. I think what you're doing is really, really very empowering, which is a much overused term. I've left employment now, so I can do whatever I want to do, and I'm doing the things that I felt that I constrained not to do before. And so you've made that possible for me. So you're wonderful. We love you.
Thank you, and we love you too. So I hope to see you all again, either this afternoon or tomorrow. But yes, we're going to be taking a break. And when we come back, we'll be on a different Zoom call. So if you do come back, it's a new link. So we will see you. Thanks again. This was wonderful. Yes.